welcome to the Skinny for Friday, August 2nd. I'm Mitch Perry, senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix, joined as I am every week, every Friday at this time by my colleagues, Ray Roa, the editor-in-chief of Creative Loafing, and author and independent reporter, Ben Montgomery. Good morning, guys.
Good morning, Mitch. How's it going?
Good. Good to see you.
You too.
So, hey, we should tell people later on in the program, we're going to hear from Irene Sullivan, a former Florida juvenile and family court judge turned author, whose latest book explores the foster care system and how it deals with our children here in the state of Florida. But first, you might remember, listeners, from a few weeks ago, we hosted a debate with all 5 Democrats running in Florida's 13th congressional district in Pinellas County, where the winner on August 20th will face GOP incumbent Anna Paulina Luna in November. And so for equal time, we believe we have the Congresswoman here via Zoom. Congresswoman, are you there with us?
I am. Can you hear me? I apologize if it might be loud. I'm actually in the car right now.
Yeah, absolutely. We can hear you. So great to have you here. And I believe, Congresswoman, you've been on the road this week with J.D. Vance. Is that correct?
I have. I actually just got back yesterday. So glad to be back home in Florida where it's nice and moist.
Yeah, nice and broiling right now. Another heat advisory going on. So, okay, so I don't want to, we won't get. I want to talk about you and your record and the like. I don't want to get into the presidential race too much, but I do want to bring up JD because you've been with him this week, and I think this comment that came out that's made a kind of a kerfuffle. Let's say here, his comments about childless single women with cats, right? It's really kind of stirs things up, and I know that you might say, well, Democrats are ginning this up, and so is the media. But some Republicans have taken issue with this. Alaska Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski said this week that the comment was offensive to me as a woman. And the conservative pro-business Wall Street Journal editorial page wrote last week about his J.D. Vance's suggestion from a few years ago that the childless should pay higher taxes than other Americans. They wrote, and I quote here, "It's bad politics. Conservatives used to believe in a neutral tax code that didn't play favorites, but Mr. Vance is suggesting the code should be used as a political and cultural weapon against people who don't share his values." They went on to say, "Raise taxes on the childless isn't a winning campaign slogan." Do you think, and he really hasn't, apologized for this. What do you make of all that?
First of all, what I will tell people is you have to listen to these interviews that he's on so you can get the full context. So like speaking to the idea that he would want to raise taxes on the childless, to my understanding, that was actually a child tax credit for people that have more children. And look, I'm just going to be real with you guys. I actually struggled for a really, really long time to get pregnant. And I know firsthand what that's like to be, like a young working woman. I'm now, a working mom up in Washington. I go back and forth. And what I will tell you is, when you listen to the context of the interview and hear JD talk, he is talking about how there seems to be this war on families by this progressive left that is almost, trying to erase motherhood. And I actually spoke about that on the campaign trail. And so I know we're trying to talk about my platform here, right, but just to answer your question.
Yeah, no, I brought it up. Definitely.
Yeah. When you're busy calling women who are having children, birthing persons and chest feeders, and essentially taking that very, very sacred, saying of having a child away from someone, it is absolutely a movement. And so I think that JD, when he goes and he explains everything, you hear him on his trail, on the campaign trail, someone who literally was raised by his mother, his mama, experienced what happens within, our country when people struggle from addiction. This is a part of the campaigning that I hate, where it gets nasty. People try to take things out of context. And so what I will say is listen to those for yourself, understand the full context of what he meant. And that's exactly why I went on the campaign trails, because I think that right now we have really big issues. We have inflation, all-time high. We have an open border. And as you saw at the Olympics, there's literally a war on women. And so I'm hoping to get elected leaders in office that will correct those issues. And so that's exactly why I've been so vocal on it.
Right. And we won't get into that Olympic topic you just mentioned, because I think that's maybe that's a little more complex.
I'll come back next week, Mitch.
Yeah. Okay,
so I'll come back next week.
But let's talk about what you've been doing here this summer. Early this summer, you were dogging Attorney General Merrick Garland because he had refused to release the audio tapes of President Biden's interview with Special Counsel Robert Hur following the investigation into the president's taking of classified documents back when he was a senator and vice president. And last month, you sponsored a resolution that would have held Garland in, quote, in inherent contempt of Congress and fined him $10,000 a day and each day until he released the tapes. Now, that resolution went to Congress, and it was close, but it lost 210 to 204. 4 Republicans voted no, and some other Republicans weren't there. Now, Biden, as we all know, that he's not running for re-election now. So is that push for those tapes now all over now?
No. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned that members weren't there, because we would have had the vote if members were in town. There were some medical emergencies, so people had to leave. But what I will tell you is this from the very beginning has been about people defying the authority of Congress. And so inherent contempt, to put it in perspective, was actually put into our rule book and how we conduct ourselves in Congress by Thomas Jefferson. So when you defy a subpoena, anyone else on earth, whether it's me or you, we go to jail. But if you're in Washington, there is a special privilege that's given. And I don't agree with that. I think that everyone should be treated equally. And so, again, I've been pretty big on prison reform, and also to, drawing from my own experiences. I think it's really egregious that you had multiple subpoenas sent and the AG just defied them outright. The DOJ, within 2 days of us holding him in criminal contempt, when we voted on that, said that they weren't going to bring charges, and anyone else would go to jail for that. So I don't believe in double standards, and that's exactly why I did it. I know, in theory, it sounds a little bit crazy, little old Luna's going after the attorney general, but, part of the reason I ran and I got elected, people wanted to end government corruption. So I think I'm upholding one of my campaign promises.
So, right. But you say you still want to see those tapes released. Is that correct?
Mitch, I want to see the subpoena complied with. I actually offered, and I think it's important for people to know, even before I brought this up, we called over to the Attorney General's office and offered to listen to those tapes in a SCIF, because the White House was concerned that Republicans were going to take these tapes and chop them up. But you can't do that if it's in a SCIF. So we just want to see what's on the tapes to see why is it that Attorney General Garland's risking contempt of Congress. And I still do believe, and I actually made public calls, that I don't think that Biden is, I think that there's some serious cognitive issues. And I hold those same sentiments with other members of Congress, to include Democrats.
Yeah.
So
right.
I have national security concerns.
Sure. Well, I think other people do too. Absolutely. And that's maybe why he's not running for re-election at this point. Just to stay on that for a moment, Speaker Mike Johnson, now he kind of seemed like he had some reservations about what you were doing there. He said, as a constitutional litigator, his preference was to follow the legal process, not go, do this inherent contempt order there.
Yeah, I disagree with Johnson on quite a bit, actually. But the one thing I will tell you is I actually brought this to him early on when I first discovered it. And I don't know if your viewers know this, but I actually read this in our rule book, because when I was recovering from having my son, Henry, they actually told me that I couldn't vote. And actually, all female members, if you have a child and you're recovering, you actually cannot vote, which is very crazy to me that we're even having this conversation, in this day and age. But and that's also something that's on changing. But yeah, going back to that, Johnson, I think, knows that there is constitutional backing for this. I think that he just didn't want to appear that he was putting members in a tough place for re-election. But again, it's not a tough vote when you're thinking about the fact that every other American goes to jail if they defy subpoenas. I don't see what's so controversial about that. Just give us the information that we're asking. Respect us as a co-equal branch of government. We are speaking with Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna from Pinellas County. She is running unopposed. She already won her Republican primary later this month. Of course, we'll be facing a Democrat in November. That Democrat will learn in November 20th, or excuse me, on August 20th. Staying one more question with this whole issue, and let's talk about this. You did talk, I think you did say you predicted Joe Biden would not be the nominee. And so I was right. Yeah, you were right. And I think some Democrats were hoping you'd be right in that respect. It's kind of crazy how it's all worked out here. But let me ask you this, because I know right after the president announced he wouldn't run for re-election, going back to Speaker Johnson, I don't know where you were on this, Congresswoman. Some people were saying, well, Joe Biden doesn't have the cognition and have the mental acuity to really run for re-election. He shouldn't really be president even right now. And they called immediately at that time for maybe he should step down. But we haven't really heard those calls in the last few weeks now. Where are you at on that? I've been continuously calling for him to step down. And I do, again, going back to the whole reason why I want to hear the tapes, is I do believe that if he's cognitively not there, and having other conversations with other Democrats about this, in the Never Biden camp that did not want him to be the nominee, they had those same concerns. And so obviously we want to know, who's running the country if he's actually not there. And so, again, I think that if it were me giving advice, I'd say his cabinet needs to bring up the 25th Amendment, because I have my serious reservations about what's going on with him. Obviously everyone's really focused on the presidential right now, but just because we're in an election season does not mean that we just, stop doing our job. And so part of my job is to ensure that whoever's running the White House is the person that was elected. And as of right now, I don't think it's Joe Biden.
Right. There's some concerns, I think, I've heard from Republicans who think, though, if you do that, then Kamala Harris takes over the White House right now. That kind of, makes her the quasi-incumbent, if you will. I mean, she gets to fly on Air Force One. That might boomerang against Republicans.
I have concerns about national security measures. And right now, we need someone that's mentally there. I don't care if it's her interim. I care about the fact that we need to protect our country first and foremost. And by the way, even from a political perspective, I mean, she's running for president. I want to hear what she has to say off script.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that for sure. For sure. Reporters were clamoring for Joe Biden to speak off script after the debacle of the debate. So I absolutely want to hear Kamala Harris go off script and get interviewed on 60 Minutes or some other show. So let's talk about immigration, which you mentioned at the top, and I know is a big issue for you and big issue for Republicans. And basically this year is a winning issue for Republicans for sure. And so my question to you is not, because and again, we'll say Donald Trump in polls, whether against Joe Biden or maybe now against Kamala Harris, although I haven't seen it so much against Harris, will probably be the same. That's one of the really big divides in terms of where Trump is, if not, the election is so close, if he's not winning, what have you. I mean, it's a good issue for Republicans to run on. Democrats are definitely on defense here. My question to you, Congresswoman, is going forward, say you do get reelected in November, I think more than ever, Democratic voters believe this too. We've seen this obviously what's gone on in New York City with all the migrants who've been flown up there from Greg Abbott in Texas, is that how do we fix this issue? Now, I know the Democrats, a talking point for them has been about the James Langford bill, right, for the Oklahoma senator who filed this bill earlier this year that definitely was going to do, some things I know you probably supported, provided funding to build a wall, increase technology at the border, add more detention beds, more agents, more deportation flights. But for whatever reason, it didn't happen. Democrats will say Trump said he didn't want it to happen, whatever. Okay, so going forward, though, now, it's going to have to take, right, Democrats and Republicans to agree on a major immigration bill. Can you see that happening? I was actually reading that Tom Swayze, a Democrat from New York who won a special election back in February by focusing on immigration, is now working with Texas Republican Morgan Luttrell on putting together bipartisan legislation. They're going to introduce it maybe as early as next month. We don't know what the details are, so I can't ask you about that. But again, the idea that this is a big political weapon, but can we, Congress come together and actually do something about this?
I think so. So this is a multifaceted answer. So just stick me with me for a minute. So first of all, the immigration that we will come together on, the issue that we're having right now is that in the Senate, not in the House, but in the Senate, Republicans over there are pushing this idea that, and I don't think it's widely adopted. I think it's just a small faction that's going to be controlling the votes, that they will not do or to even touch immigration if there's somehow amnesty not involved with that. And what I will say to them is that first and foremost, amnesty, immigration, border security, these are all separate issues, but holistically, we have to fix them. What I will tell you is I'm against amnesty, but on the immigration front, clearly we want people to come here legally, but the more people that are coming here the wrong way are making it way more complicated and bogging down the immigration courts and making it way harder for people that are trying to do it by the right way, right? And then you have this aspect of, we have crime increasing because of the open border. And so, Mitch, I think that anyone who's looked at my platform over the last 4 years has understood that the reason why I even got involved in politics is because I started out as a counter-trafficking advocate. I'm still very much so big on that. I think it's abhorrent, and it is Congress's fault too. But also too, I believe that it's Kamala Harris's fault because she was in charge of the border. That 85,000 children have gone missing under our purview because of what's happened with the porous border. And so I think that it's something that we will come to terms on. But again, I've had to call out my own party because I do believe that if you actually want to fix the immigration issue, you have to ensure that people are not coming here and then they in turn are being exploited. I don't know if you saw recently, there was a documentary where Tyson Chicken Farms actually was caught hiring illegal children. And when I started doing tweets about that and messaging on that, I had a lobbyist call my office to try to get me to stop. So when I say that members of Congress are under pressure by big corporation to stay silent on certain issues, I mean that. I'll probably get a call after I do this interview. I frankly don't care. I think we need E-Verify. I think that it's gross to exploit people to come here illegally simply to say that they are going to, quote, pick the crops like so many people have said. And I think that that's wrong.
Right. We're again speaking with Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna. We have her to the bottom of the hour here, 11:30. Okay. I want to ask you about, you mentioned this, I think you glided on this about Democrats being anti-woman. Now, you have said this when it comes to supporting your IVF bill, but you did originally co-sponsor the IVF bill filed by Democratic Representative Susan Wild. In fact, you co-sponsored that sooner than many Democrats from Florida did, but then you withdrew your support and you wrote your own bill. What was wrong with Susan Wild's bill?
Susan Wild's bill, the way that they wrote it specifically could have created a loophole for states that did not want to support abortion. And so after finding that, I actually reached out to her team. I told them directly. And then also to when she initially had reached out to me, I told her, I'd be interested in co-sponsoring it, but we have to look at it. And then her team, I don't think it was her fault. I think that her team assumed automatically to add me to it, which, I still support it. And I will say that I think IVF as a whole, there have been so many misconceptions about what it is to people. I know many of my family members have had to use IVF to get pregnant. And I think this idea that IVF is somehow, mass abortion is the wrong view and perspective to have. It can be a very wonderful thing. And because of what we're seeing right now, with the increase in infertility rates. And that's a whole separate topic. I've actually been doing stuff to help clean up our food supply because I think it's related with the glyphosates and all of these parabens and phosphates and everything that we have right now impacting our food supply. I think that that's a part of it. But what I will say is that it really ticked me off that I was one of the only Republicans to actually put forward good legislation that could actually have this be impactful and protect IVF in states that are against it, or at least IVF access, and that not one Democrat would support it. And that was because Hakeem Jeffries, just like my maternity vote by proxy bill, told them to block it.
On abortion, I know that you talked when we've had this whole 6-week law bill, which is now a law. I think you had said earlier, like Donald Trump, that you think the states should handle this. So let me ask you this, because now the state is going to vote in November on Amendment 4, which would restore abortion rights to the point of viability. How will you vote on that?
What I will tell you is I personally am very pro-life, and I'm not ever going to, change that position. Mitch, you know that my husband is a byproduct of an unconsensual event and thus was adopted out. But again, I think that as a federal legislator, that it would be wrong for me to tell the states what to do on these topics because that's not what our founding fathers anticipated. So what I will tell people is to vote your conscience. I think you know how I will probably be voting on that. But again, that's not my decision to make. It's up to the people in Florida to decide.
Okay, my colleague Ray Rowe has a question.
Hey, Congresswoman, I was wondering, going back to this Merrick Garland thing, how's it going? Nice to have you back. Bear with me here. It's kind of a long question. So last month, this large investment you made in America First Natural Resources came under scrutiny. That's a company obviously created by Bruce Rosenthal, who supported you, and it produces oil and gas in the U.S. Now, to be clear, there is no prohibition against members of Congress doing business with any political supporters, and any votes of yours in the Economic Growth, Energy Policy, and Regulatory Affairs Subcommittee technically would not be a conflict of interest. But the investment from you was about in between $200,000 to $450,000, according to the Miami Herald. And since 2020, Rosenthal has given more than $40,000 to PACs supporting you. When you talk about trust in government, do you think that kind of exchange of money might create some distrust within your constituents? Everybody's got to make money, but do you wish you would have maybe invested in something else in hindsight?
Well, no, because I don't investing in stocks because of that reason. And I'm actually, I don't know if you know this, but I'm moving committee. So I'm actually not even going to be on a committee that will impact that decision anymore because I want it to be as clean as possible. But no, I actually think that that's right in line with my perspective in that, right now our government is subsidizing and really purchasing oil from places like Venezuela that are completely opposite of what we should be even focusing on. And again, going back into the clean energy and green energy, the oil investment that I decided to invest in is some of the cleanest in the world. I'm not advocating, by the way, for anyone to invest in this company. But what I will say is that I'm a person that will literally put my money where my mouth is. And so I think that that's something that, more people should do. And by the way, if you really want to talk about cleaning up Washington, I think we need to be focusing on why is it that you have members, to include Nancy Pelosi, but also to even Republicans that are at high-ranking positions that are insider trading.
Right, absolutely. We only have a couple minutes left to go here, so I'll try to fire these off to you quickly. A couple listeners have written in. They want to know, believe they've mentioned Republican Representatives Jordan, Perry, and Biggs have also ignored congressional subpoenas. Will you hold them accountable?
Well, so how it works with congressional subpoenas is it has to be done in that congressional year. It can't be brought prior. But what I will say is there are people literally sitting in jail, Steve Bannon being one of them, for ignoring subpoena. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Okay. Also, you will, of course, we talked about, we had the Democrats on here. Will you debate the winner of the Democratic primary? I will debate the winner of the Democrat Party if they're a serious candidate. I think when you're going around, saying that states' rights are federal issues, that you can't actually talk about a platform, and then also, too, you're getting endorsements by people like Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who've been called out by the Republican National Hispanic Committee for being actually racist. I don't take those people seriously.
Okay. So
is there anybody in that crop of candidates that you do see as a serious candidate?
No, not right now. In fact, I had one of them I think report me to the FBI as a Russian asset and stalk my office. So I think as of right now, I don't know if you guys would consider that being serious, but I don't.
So let's talk about beach nourishment on Pinellas County beaches. Of course, I think people in Pinellas County know, it's been an impasse between the beach communities and the Army Corps of Engineers. Government says they won't add sand to the public beaches unless local property owners sign perpetual easements allowing public access to their land. Many landowners are refusing. The Army Corps isn't doing anything. A proposal you offered to stop funding the Army Corps renourishment policy did pass in the House, hasn't been taken up in the Senate yet. A couple of your Democratic opponents have criticized your approach. What do you say there?
I hope that they look at Charlie Crist's record on it, because as of right now, I've been more effective than Charlie Crist. But, when I actually came into office, this has been an issue that predates me. And so I actually did look at Charlie Crist, David Jolly, all of their records on how they actually dealt with the Army Corps, and then reached out to Gus Bilirakis and see kind of what he had experience-wise. And what I found is that, again, Congress will send letters. And because Congress is not being taken seriously, going back to why I went and did what I did with Garland, the Army Corps just thought that they could ignore us. And so actually got together with the local mayors. We actually tried to even defund the secretary position for the Army Corps. And then after that, you're finding that it's not just our county alone. It's actually 9 other counties in the state of Florida, to include many red states that are having issues with the Army Corps. So our community then sent a delegation to actually meet with the Biden White House. Biden White House promised to also help fix the issue, and they never did. So we have effectively defunded something called WERDA, which was the memo that the Army Corps pointed to in order to enforce their easement requests. I also, though, to be quite transparent with you guys, I don't think that it's right that the federal government should be demanding property rights to restore an area that, by the way, has sea turtles, which are endangered species as well. So I think this is very political, very multifaceted, but we have been dealing with it better than any other member, Democrat or Republican.
Last question for you, Congresswoman. This week, the Pinellas County Commission voted to give more than $312 million in tourist tax money to help transform the current site where the Tampa Bay Rays play in St. Pete into a mixed-use development that includes offices, housing, hotel rooms, and, a baseball stadium. Your Democratic opponents, they were asked in a Bay News 9 debate if they supported public funding. They all said they did for a stadium. Where do you stand on that if you had to vote on that issue?
You guys like putting me in the local issues. What I can tell you is Pinellas County as a whole, long term, I think that project will bring a ton of money back to the community and to the state. And long term, if we have more money, we're relying less on federal dollars. So assume what you will there. I'm not a state rep, but what I will tell you is I do think that it's going to be really good for our community.
Okay, great. We'll leave it there. Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna from Congressional District 13, thank you so much for joining us here on the WNF's Skinny.
Hey, bring me back on to talk about parabens and Red 40.
You'll come on for the debate with the winner of the primary.
Well, if it's a serious candidate, if it's not, no offense, but Charlie Crist wouldn't debate me, and there seemed to be a double standard. So,
all right, Congressman, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay, there you go, Anna Paulina Luna. Okay, we're going to transition now. We've got going to go to my colleague Ben Montgomery talking here to former Judge Irene Sullivan in the studio now.
Yeah, we're going to take you back to January of 2006 when a young man from Clearwater, whose name was Leo Boatman, took a Greyhound bus up to the Ocala National Forest under the auspices of going on a camping trip. He walked into the woods, into the deep woods in the Ocala National Forest, camped out one night, and then ditched his tent and the rest of his gear, and then continued to a small, sort of secluded spot in the middle of the forest called Hidden Pond, where he organically came across a couple of strangers to him, 2 college students from Santa Fe University, from the Gainesville area, who were down camping in the Ocala National Forest. And he had a short interaction with them, and then pulled out a rifle and killed them both in cold blood. This was a shocking case. It prompted a manhunt that lasted for a few days before the police very quickly arrested Leo Boatman, who had made his way back to the Tampa Bay area. This was a shocking crime, but it wasn't the end of the story for Leo Boatman. And what happened next, I think, is almost as interesting as the first part of his life, because our next guest, Judge Irene Sullivan, has spent a lot of time getting to know Leo Boatman since he's been convicted of a double homicide in the Ocala National Forest in 2006. And she took great interest in his past, in what made him who he was. So welcome to our show, retired family court judge Irene Sullivan. Let me ask you first, when did Leo Boatman come across your radar to begin with?
Well, first, Ben, let me thank you for inviting me here. I'm privileged and honored. I haven't been in your studio before, and I appreciate this opportunity.
Of course.
So the question was, when did I first...
when did Leo Boatman come across your radar for the first time?
I was a juvenile judge in Clearwater when this tragic event in the Ocala National Forest happened. These 2 college kids were killed. And then there was a manhunt for him, which you wrote the story, Ben, when you worked for the St. Petersburg Times, about the manhunt. And so I read it, and I waited till he was captured. And as a juvenile judge, you're always asking, when kids get arrested and they commit crimes, whether it's a theft or a murder or taking drugs, why are they doing it? So I wondered, why did this kid, who I knew by then because I read your story, had been locked up for 6 years before this, why, when he got out of juvenile prisons, did he commit this horrible murder? So I started to write to him, and I became his pen pal.
And what did you learn about his early years?
Well, he has a tragic story, and he never had an advocate in his life for him until a later trial when he had some attorneys that represented him, but they were his only advocates in his life. He was just had a tragic birth. He was born to a woman who he was conceived and born in a mental hospital. And he never knew his father. Yeah. And he was passed around in foster care, and he had a very abusive foster father. And then he was locked up for 6 years when he was 13 to 19.
He started acting out.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, he acted out. He did love school. He liked to go to school, and he's a very smart man, and he was a smart boy. And he loved school, and he loved reading. But he had no one to stick up for him, no parent, no relative, no one who cared.
In what ways was he abused in foster care? Do you know the details?
Well, yes, I write about it in the book. His foster father's first name was Tony, and he wasn't the only foster boy there. Tony was supposedly known as a foster dad who could take care of troubled boys, but unfortunately he just made them more troubled. So some of the other boys, along with Leo, complained to their case managers, but the case managers just thought it was their fault that Tony was a good guy. So he would run away. And when you run away as a kid, then you steal food and you get arrested. And he actually liked to be in the juvenile detention center when he was arrested because it was not abusive like it was at Tony's house. That's the first kid I ever knew that preferred to be in the juvenile detention center.
Wow. Just to back up a little bit, how did he wind up in foster care? You said he was conceived and born in a mental institution.
He had a nice grandmother, but she had his older sister, Rosie, and it was too hard for her to take care of both of them. So she actually adopted him, Leo, and then gave him up back to the state because she couldn't handle both. And he was kind of a handful. He never had appropriate therapy and so on. He lived temporarily with some cousins in Orlando, but they, didn't have adequate therapy for him or anything. So he was turned back to the state and then spent all his time in foster care.
And so he entered the juvenile justice system or the detention system at around the age of 13, is that right?
Yes, he did. He was committed to the juvenile residential programs, not the detention center, but the regular commitment programs at age 13, and it was stayed there till 19. And the last one he was in was called Omega Juvenile Prison down in Sarasota area, and it was shut down after he left for being very abusive to boys.
And I know this because I've also talked to Leo, but he told me that while he was in custody, especially when he was in solitary confinement or any kind of confinement, he would often just lose himself in books and magazines and literature that dealt with the outdoors and adventure. He liked to read about Daniel Boone and Lewis and Clark and the conquistadors, and he read National Geographic magazines, and it was at this point that he learned about the Appalachian Trail, what that was, 2,100 mile footpath stretching from Georgia to Maine, and he decided maybe one day he wanted to walk on the Appalachian Trail. This whole time, though, what was curious to me was he was being abused and neglected by people who were meant to care for him. Did you learn about that time for him?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
He's a very smart young man at that point, and he loved books. He loved reading. And when he was in the juvenile prisons, the guards there wouldn't give him enough books. He had to parcel it out. I know you love reading, and I love reading.
Yeah.
But imagine having to say to yourself, I'm only going to read like 10 pages today, because they wouldn't give him all the books that were in the prison library
He had to
read.
time it, so he finished when the next cart came around.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Yeah. So 5 years in the juvenile justice in the detention center.
Well, not the detention center. That's an intermediate place when you're first arrested.
Right. So
But
5 years actually incarcerated
in juvenile commitment
justice.
programs. Really 6 years, 13 to 19.
Yeah.
He was released at 19 because they lost jurisdiction.
Sure.
And then shortly after that, these awful murders in the Ocala Forest happened.
Yeah. So what were his plans when he got out of juvenile detention?
Well, he was out for 6 months before the murders happened. And he did work at Hooters for a while. He was well-liked there. He lived with an Uncle Vic, kind of an older guy who had just got out of prison himself. And that didn't work out too well. So he had plans to go to college. He actually enrolled in St. Pete College because as a foster kid, he looked into it himself and found out there was a stipend for foster kids, free tuition. So he had planned on that. But he also wanted to go camping like you described. And when he did, just for some reason, and as I say, I'm certainly not trying to excuse that in any way what happened, but I wrote the book so people could understand him, not excuse him. So he just got so angry, and visions of guards went through his head, and he saw these 2 kids, a boy and a girl, college students, camping. I think he might have been jealous of them because he was locked up and never had a date for 6 years, his teenage years.
Yeah.
And he shot and killed them.
What kind of I'm sure you've seen others, although that sounds pretty extreme to me. What kind of I'm just wondering if you miss all of your adolescent years or spend all of those years in state custody, where daily, even if the staff is fantastic, these are not people who are your family. They're not your parents. They're not there to love you. What is a kid who comes out of that level, that length of incarceration like? What are they like mentally?
Well,
How do they view the world?
We don't have many people to compare him to because he was the longest locked up juvenile in Florida history.
Wow.
There's no one who's been locked up from 13 to 19 with no break from that. So I think that we saw what happened to Leo, a smart, caring young man. He was angry, just uncontrollably angry at everyone. Mm-hmm. And he saw images of the guards who taunted him, wouldn't give him books. He became angry while he was in commitment programs. One thing he did was to get back at the guards, he would bite the inside of his mouth to create blood, and then when they would come by, he would spit it at the guards.
Oh, my
Now,
goodness.
that's horrible. And this was during AIDS kind of situations. People were concerned about AIDS.
That's your only power.
Yeah.
That's all
Exactly.
you've got.
I didn't even know you could do that. I never tried.
Yeah.
But so I'm not a psychologist, and I can't analyze him like that, but I just think he was uncontrollably angry when he got out.
And it didn't stop there.
No.
Yeah.
Because then once these murders in Ocala Forest happened, he was committed to adult prison. He was an adult then, 19. And he raged out there too. And he was not a easy prisoner, let's put it that way.
Yeah. And he killed a cellmate.
Yeah, there was an incident that he claimed was self-defense, that a cellmate who came up on him from behind and Leo said attacked him. He turned around and beat his head on the cement floor until he died.
And this was just a few years after his conviction, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And that wasn't the last.
No.
No.
His conviction, actually, he pled to it to avoid the death penalty for the Ocala National Forest murders. He pled to it. So there was no trial then.
Yeah.
But there were a couple other incidents in prison, and now he's on death row at Florida State Prison.
Yeah. What has it been like for you getting to know him? What sorts of things do you all write about?
Well, I haven't written to him since the book got published. I didn't really, even on the end stages when I was doing the last draft, because I didn't want him to be suggesting changes in that. Because unfortunately, at one point, he was appointed a guardian ad litem by the courts, the juvenile courts, and that man sexually abused him.
Jesus.
And
This is what is, at every turn, this young man was abused.
exactly. He had no one he could turn to, but this young, and I use a different name for this man, the guardian who abused him in the book, but I call him Toby in the book, or Archie, excuse me. I call him Archie in the book. And Archie is still his friend because Leo told me he's the only one who writes to him in prison, sends him stamps, things like that.
His abuser.
His abuser.
Is his only friend.
Right.
If you're just tuning in, our guest right now is retired family court judge Irene Sullivan, who is the author of a new book, Born and Raised to Murder, A Failure of Foster Care. I'm curious, as a follow-up to Ben, as far as the unprecedented nature of his imprisonment, has the penal system, specifically juvenile, has it changed at all in light of what happened to him? Has it learned any lessons?
Well, I've been retired now for a number of years, so I can't say exactly what it's like now. But we certainly tried to make it more. It should be rehabilitative. You try to rehabilitate a young man or young woman, not just punish them. That was always our goal, and I think and it happens in a lot of juvenile commitment facilities. Excuse me, but unfortunately not in Omega, where Leo spent his last juvenile years there, which was shut down.
Judge, our listeners are hearing you on the radio, a very old school form of communication and media, but you're talking about pen pals. Some people listening, younger people, might not even know what the concept of a pen pal is. When I was in elementary school, we had pen pals in other countries. Can you speak to our listeners a little bit about how you start a pen pal relationship with somebody who is in prison? Maybe they're interested in doing that. How does that work?
Yeah.
Well, I was a juvenile judge, and when I heard about these murders in the Ocala Forest, I said to my assistant, I'm going to write to him and find out why he did this. And she said, he's never going to write back. So we had a bet, which I won, because he did write back. And I think he was interested in anyone who would write to him or pretend to be a friend or whatever. Then I visited him a few times in his various prison commitments. I haven't seen him lately. He's about 38 years old now, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so were you writing on a regular basis? Was it, every couple of months?
Every couple of months in the beginning.
Yeah.
But I haven't much now.
Yeah. I did some preparation in advance. I met with Leo. This was before he had been accused of murdering a cellmate. But I met with him to ask him questions about that day. I also became aware of his long and sad history in the records. I read through family records that suggested, I think it was the first interaction he had ever had with the state, and it was because a neighbor had complained or had called because the kids, he and his sister, I think, who were just toddlers at the time, were out wandering in their diapers far away from home with no parental supervision. And so he's a toddler then when his name first shows up in state records. And then it's just consistent from the family issues, the custody issues, entering foster care, the complaints in foster care. Then you see the uptick in minor arrests for misdemeanors, and this is going nowhere good. We as a society have a responsibility of helping kids like that, these adolescents who can decide whether they're going to spend a life doing crime or being a contributing citizen. And in this case, we failed in a dramatic way. Do you think that was a combination of all the experiences in his life, or do you think that we can point a finger directly at the juvenile justice system?
Well, the first finger, I think his grandmother tried, and she had them when they were toddlers running around, he and his older sister out in the street. But she tried. She was just older, and she just couldn't handle it. But I point the finger first at the foster father, frankly.
Yeah.
Because if he'd had a therapeutic foster experience and loving people there who encouraged him to do well in school, because he loved school and to be in school, he wouldn't have run away and he wouldn't have been arrested. Like one of his early arrests when he ran away was he burned down a little hot dog shed. Mm-hmm. No people were in it or anything, but he did it because he knew that arson would get you more than 15 days in the detention center. Otherwise, the limit was 15 days. But for a serious felony like arson, the judge could order more time.
Yeah.
So he did that purposely because it was better to be in juvenile detention.
Yeah.
And that kind of does speak good for juvenile detention in Pinellas County.
Yeah.
But to think then, of what he lacked, what no one else provided, is really sad. And I start with the foster system.
That confinement, too, from, for all of your adolescent years, you're missing so much. You're missing out on a million experiences that kids who aren't confined have, from learning how to speak with people, learning how to drive a car, all the things. I can't imagine. Did you ever get inside of his mind in regards to what kind of person he felt like when he came out? I mean, we know the results of it, but
Right.
Was he insightful enough to give you some perspective on how he was when he came out of the system? It has this sudden rush of freedom, for the first time since he's been a kid.
Yes, I think he had some good insight into himself. In fact, at the back cover of the book, I quote Leo Boatman for exactly what he told me, why he wanted me to write this book. And he said, if you don't mind me reading it, it's only 3 lines. I want my story to be told, so what happened to me never happens to another foster kid. If you want to create a pit bull, put a kid in solitary confinement in a juvenile prison without books to read and taunted by prison guards. Those are his exact words. I did not edit it at all.
Yeah.
And that was his motivation for wanting his story told in the book.
What if you're concerned about this? If you're just a listener and a citizen, how do people get involved in protecting kids who are in the juvenile justice system? Is there a way to help?
Well, the first thing would be to volunteer as a guardian ad litem, because the gentleman that I met and I talk about in this book, who was abusive to Leo, is a real exception. I knew guardians ad litem when I was a juvenile judge for 9 years, and I would call them often the most objective people in court because they really knew the child they were responsible for. They weren't the father, they weren't the sister, they weren't the foster a mom. They were, a guardian out there for the best interest of the children. So every circuit in Florida has a good guardian ad litem program, and I'd sign up there.
Where do folks turn to find that information? Do you know? Is that the county clerk's office?
The clerk's office or a website for whatever. Sixth Judicial Circuit is Pinellas County. 13th is Tampa area. So their websites. will direct you to the garden ad litem program. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And let me ask you, Judge, this is a fascinating book about the psyche of Leo Boatman, but how much in your writing and your talking to him did you learn about how he felt about Amber Peck and John Parker, the two 26-year-olds that he killed? Did he end up learning anything about them? Like, who were they as you started to, lean into Leo?
Well, Amber Peck and John Parker and their families, especially, because they're not alive anymore, Amber and John, but their families I feel so bad for. And Leo did too, because he just couldn't control himself. He never said to me that he was jealous of them, because here's a young man and young woman, athletic, nice-looking, camping in the forest, and he never had a date because he was locked up from 13 to 19. But so jealousy could have been it. But he told me that in the forest that day, he couldn't relax because what the guards did to him was always in his mind, what they said to him, the taunting and that. And he would say to himself, get out of my mind, guards. And it just caused him to lose control. And he had a rifle with him. He was supposed to be hunting little squirrels or something. So he just used that rifle and saw them and burst out into anger and killed them.
Yeah, they could have been anyone, right?
Yes.
I think in that moment.
And they were nice to him because
Right.
he asked some directions to Hidden Pond, and they said, "Oh, you're going the wrong way. It's this way." So he turned around, left them for a minute or so, and then turned back and killed them.
Yeah. Tragic. I think, so when I was reporting on Leo Boatman, I think the trouble that some readers had was they could say, well, bad things happen to a lot of people and we don't all kill. This, however, is a case like none other I've ever seen. Are you aware of other children who have been abused and neglected at this level?
No,
Yeah.
not to the extent.
This is rare.
Rare.
Yeah.
Because it went on for so long.
Right.
And if you discount the relatives, grandmothers he had, but starting in foster care, he was abused, starting at age 11, 12, 13, and then 6 years in confinement, he was abused.
Yeah.
So you don't have a normal person that comes out of that, I don't think.
I just got a call. Leo spent time at the infamous Dozier School for Boys, which I spent a lot of time writing about when I worked at the St. Petersburg Times. And I got a call just this morning from a lawyer representing a man on death row whose warrant has been signed. He's set to be executed on August 29th, Lauren Cole. And he was at the Dozier School in 1984, and they were asking these very questions. Well, what do you know about how kids were treated in the Dozier School? And it just seems like a place like that, Leo has spent a short time there, places like that, like the Omega Center you refer to, they can do so much to make a borderline kid a bad kid. It seems to me like that moment is crucial, and the system so often messes kids up more than they would be otherwise. Did you find any insight into how we can fix the juvenile justice system? How we can make it better? In your research for this book?
Well, when I was a juvenile judge, we knew about Dozier, and Dozier was closed down. And even before that, we wouldn't send any kids in our court to Dozier, even if they have to be committed for a while, because it was very abusive. And actually, I've heard recently that I think 1/3 of the men on death row in Florida are graduates of Dozier School.
Yeah, I've heard this as well.
Yeah.
Someone's working a book about that very thing.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
It's just awful. So I don't think Leo was there long enough to have that had, the dramatic effect on him to lead him to murder these college kids. But combined with everything else, it just piled on.
Yeah.
So I just think you need more independent observers like guardians ad litem. You need case managers in foster care that are really going to listen to the kids. Don't just ignore a kid when he complains, especially when it's multiple kids, like in this foster care situation.
Yeah.
And, kids, I didn't find many kids who were untruthful in juvenile court. Kids express themselves if they have a need truthfully.
Yeah.
Can I ask you something, Judge? When you enrolled in law school at Stetson, and your kids were pretty young, I think 7, 6, and 2, and as you moved into your, maybe this is a parenting question, how do you talk to your own kids about your job and the kids that you deal with and things like that? Like, how do you mother your children in the context of talking about what you do every day?
Well, they're all adults now.
Yeah.
But at that time, when I went to law school, and as I was still raising my children, I had a lot of help from my mother and my husband. But as they got a little older and saw that I was in law school and then became a judge, they'd say, "Don't do the Judge Act, Mom. Don't judge us, right?" So I think you just try to do what every normal parent does, is listen to them and try to meet their needs. But they didn't like the Judge Act.
But would they ask you about some of the kids who came before you in the courtroom? And how do you talk about that with kids at that age?
Yeah, they did. And sometimes they visited court. And I just told them they were fortunate. They and their friends were fortunate that they could go to the schools they went to and the things they had without. And mostly had people who loved him and stood up for them and were advocates for them. I can't stress the advocacy enough, because if Leah had someone behind him, you might have read, Ben, in the book, the trial down in the west coast of Florida that he was in later. He was already incarcerated. But these two gentlemen, Toby Onk and Don McFarland, two attorneys, they could have said, "Why are we spending time representing this guy? He's in prison for life without parole." But they gave him a terrific defense in a case. And when I saw Leo dressed in a suit sitting next to them, sitting there looking proud, because someone stood up for him, advocated for him.
Leo writes in a letter to you, "Okay, I know I can't end without talking about redemption. It's easy to ask, how can I do anything to redeem myself when I'm going to die in prison? Maybe that's a cop-out. What I really want to say is that all that I've told you and written to you over the last 7 or so years has been for redemption. Like I told you in the beginning when you first wrote to me, was that I wanted to make sure that what happened to me would never happen to another foster kid anywhere. So I told you my story. I'm still so sorry that I killed those people, but your book is my redemption. I hope it works. One thing I do know for certain, the longer I'm here, the more I'm forgotten." It's hard, even in light of this book, it's hard to redeem Leo Boatman's life. It's, the result of like perpetual failure, societal failure. And it makes me wonder how many other killers are out there, how many people who've done damage in society who just needed an advocate. Just needed somebody to step up and say, "I love you and I'm there for you." Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's so true. And fortunately, the vast majority of young people, kids, have that. Whether it's a family member, a parent, or if they're in the system, a good guardian ad litem, good foster parents. But to grow up without one in your life, it's pretty sad.
Yeah. Where can people find a copy of Born and Raised to Murder, A Failure of Foster Care?
It's on Amazon. Mm-hmm.
Find it on Amazon.com, ladies and gentlemen. They'll bring it to your door, I hear.
Or put it in one of those lockers.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll deliver it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And do you have any talks or appearances coming up for this book? I'm going to work with Stetson, the law school, about putting on a program in the fall. Your alma mater.
And they're going to center it around foster, people involved in foster system, judges and that.
Oh,
to talk about it. They're going to call it a conversation.
Very good. Look for that this fall, Stetson University.
Judge Irene Sullivan, I will beg Ben to write about that for Creative Loafing so we can get a good preview. Thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations on this great new book, Born and Raised to Murder, A Failure of Foster Care. That's going to be it for us here on The Skinny here on WMNF Tampa. Thank you so much for listening, and please stay tuned because Joellen Schilke is next door in Studio One, ready with Art in Your Ear. On behalf of myself, Mitch Perry, who's gone on to tape Florida this week, Ben Montgomery here, and of course the judge, and Anna Paulina Luna at the top of the show. Thank you so much for giving us your time, and I hope that you get a lot of quality time over the weekend.
Take care.
Thank you.